It was a little after 5 in the morning on April 18th. It was a Wednesday. Your grandfather and I had been married just a year before on Easter Monday. I was awakened by tremendous shaking. It seemed to last forever, and Alfred was already up as he had to go into the office that day. We could hear screams from outside on the street. Our buildings seemed to be falling apart all around us. I yelled for my mother and sisters who lived downstairs. They seemed to be all right. We grabbed what we could of our clothes and valuables, and Alfred and I went out to the street. I couldn't believe what I was seeing and hearing. The sounds were so horrible, and the screams. I will never forget those screams. The crashing sounds were almost deafening. My mother and sister managed to wheel out her sewing machine, which they had piled their valuables onto. We set some of ours on it, and Alfred and I began to make our way down to his office, which was next to the Palace Hotel. We realized that the city was on fire. The smells and the people, they thought it was the end of the world. They were jumping out of the buildings. A woman jumped and landed a short distance in front of us. She was holding an infant, and we heard a sound, and all the people that were around us, we all ran over to see if perhaps the baby had survived, but it did not. It was as if we were in a horrible nightmare. It was complete chaos. There were a few fire engines trying to hook up hoses, but there was no water in the fire hydrants. We found out later that there was a scandal that involved the mayor and the contractor, and that the fire hydrants were not hooked up. We finally made our way to his office. I don't know how we did it. It was so dreadful, but we went there. We looked up and could see into his office. The building side was gone, but there, in his fireplace, were the newspapers that he rolled up the night before to be ready for this morning. They were untouched. And the clock on the mantle, it was intact. I managed to climb over and make my way and grab the clock, which your mother still has, and she also has that sewing machine as well. We had arranged to meet my mother and sister on top of Nob Hill. That's where everyone seemed to be going. And on the way, we saw people that had been shot and hung on fence posts, and they were holding signs that said, "Looters will be shot." It was horrible. The fires were terrible. The whole city seemed to be engulfed in flames. We heard that there were boats taking people across the bay to Oakland, so we made our way down to the waterfront and managed passage on a boat that took us to Oakland. That's how we ended up here. This is why I've lived in Oakland ever since that earthquake. My sisters, Annabelle and Ida, went back to live there on Lion Street. And we heard many stories about how many thousands had perished that day. They bulldozed the bodies into a pile they couldn't manage, and it's where now the Marina District is. They never had proper burials. They just bulldozed them. I will never forget the horrors of that day. And I know how quickly things can change.